Welcome back to Media 7. We've been looking at Helen Clark's fortunes with the media with our panel, but what of the present Prime Minister and the press? But first, a news mash. Killer fact, the 20th member of the G20 isn't even a country, it's the European Union. Also, Australia's a member and we're not. The G20's annual summit is like an AA meeting where you take your bank manager, and this year it was in London. And the people of the world's oldest democracy, as they have for centuries, took to the streets to march in solidarity against capitalism and to sing the traditional songs of resistance.
You fight bastard! You fight bastard!
But hang on, what's that? It's an iPhone, innit? Down with corporate overlords, except Steve Jobs. Look, here's another one. See the Royal Bank of Scotland lose a few windows and the photographer nearly lose an arm. Now, another angle. How many people there don't have a fancy camera? Citizen journalism, it's the new looting. As a consequence, the interwebs are sizzling with blurry citizen video of the violence. Oh wait, that's not violence. It's a dance party.
This one's for the officer.
But there's still the poor sod who has to carry a small shed on his shoulder to make a proper TV report. And the poor sod who has to try and hold a microphone.
We've had about 3,000 to 4,000.
The Guardian's cameraman caught the ultimate insult to the houses of finance. But it turned out that was only because the police, with a controversial tactic called kettling, kept the protesters confined for hours.
That sense of agitation is growing significantly.
But why is everyone so angry? Fox News had the scoop.
Americans on there really expressing kind of outrage and embarrassment that President Obama gave this iPod to the Queen. Apparently she already has one.
Oh right, it's not the credit crunch, the war or climate change. It's because Barack Obama gave the Queen an iPod. Didn't they know she wanted a phone? Since we put those clips together, the role of citizens with cameras has been thrown into stark relief. After 47-year-old newsagent Ian Tomlinson died of heart failure during the protests, British media reported that he'd been rescued from violent protesters and that what the Daily Mirror called a screaming mob had pelted police and medics with bottles as they tried to save his life. It was all a lie. The Guardian newspaper obtained a private video that showed Tomlinson, who had been trying to reach his home, being battened and knocked down from behind by a policeman. Other pictures debunked the claim of a baying mob as he died minutes later. But John Key. Indeed, yes.
So natural. It was just great.
I couldn't quite get from a man being battened to death to John Key, but perhaps by the time...
By the end
of it, not yet.
We can
Yes.
work on it. We can work on it.
Seamless.
Yes. Colin, are we seeing a traditional honeymoon for John Key with the press? Is it fair to call it that?
I think so. I don't personally think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I've already been criticised on my blog, and I know my colleagues have, of going too easy on him. But we forget Helen Clark had a big honeymoon as well.
As we discussed, yeah.
And I think it's fair enough. I mean, I think that the public wants to give a new leader some time to settle in and make their changes. Heck, we'll scrutinise those changes, but we're not going to leap on him like a ton of bricks every time he makes a small mistake, because there's going to be plenty of time for that later. And I actually just don't think our readers or our viewers would thank us for it if we did it.
I'm interested that you say that, plenty of time for that later, because I wonder whether this is something that gallery journalists do. They keep their powder dry for the big jobs.
Well, yes, I think to some extent we do. I think we also try and reflect what the public mood is to some extent, just as we discussed earlier with Helen Clark and when the tide went out on her. There are some big problems that John Key has got coming up. Obviously, at the moment the public yes. At the moment the public are tolerating him and they're not blaming him. But you know, there's a statute of limitations on blaming the previous government, and once that runs out, people are going to start saying, well, what are you going to do about the recession, about the fact that we've got, you know, 200,000 jobless or whatever?
It's interesting that we should mention Bill English, because I was struck this week by the stark difference between what Bill English said and what his Prime Minister said about the economic prognosis. And I couldn't help but think that if there'd been that much daylight between Clark and Cullen at any point, they would have been just murdered in the press.
But you'd never have known because there was discipline there, and what this is showing is a complete lack of cabinet discipline, caucus discipline. If there had been a rift, you would never have known from the Clark government, because everyone would A, respected that, but B, would have been far too damn scared to do it.
Michael Cullen told me that once Clark survived the 1996 election and her leadership was cemented, he went to her and said, "Helen, you need never fear that I will challenge or try to topple you in any way." And that's pure gold to a political leader. She never had him breathing down her neck. He never had leadership ambitions from that point on. And that was really the making of that government, whereas we can never be quite sure with Key and English just how friendly the relationship is.
I think we can be sure, actually, Dennis. I think there's no question that Bill wants the job again in the future. In fact, he said so. He said so off the record. And John has said so off the record too.
That we've never had a Prime Minister who's lost an election who's then come back and won one. I mean,
John Howard did it.
Not in New Zealand.
Not in New Zealand, no.
Thank God.
I mean, the only thing I would say about Jolly John and Bitter Bill, as they're now being called in the press gallery, is that I actually don't necessarily think that the fact that John is so happy and that Bill is so glum is necessarily a rift. I actually think that they have fundamentally different views on the economy. Now, that may or may not be a good thing, but I don't actually think it's necessarily a rift. It could work. I'm not sure. It might.
I think they're ideologically far too far apart to ever work successfully together.
Tom?
I think John Key is the first New Zealand politician at this height who's comfortable in his own skin. He's totally at ease with himself. He made his money overseas. He's got a happy home life. He survived a poor childhood, so he knows poverty. He's known great wealth. He's totally at ease with himself. And he can't believe, he takes a sort of childish glee in being Prime Minister. And we're also looking, on election night when he won, it was like he was at a birthday party and he was allowed to pop all the balloons. And I think there's an engaging quality to him. He hasn't yet become exhausted and cynical and bitter. And I think part of that personal charm, that personal ease with himself, because Longy was troubled, Muldoon was troubled, Kirk was troubled, Bolger had demons. Mike Moore, well, he had an asylum full of demons.
But how much of that is reality, and how much of it do you think is the extremely competent job that his communications advisors did last year of giving him a series of soft stories that show them in his nice house, show them with his nice family?
He's been managed. He's been
but
managed.
he didn't bugger those opportunities up either. When he took that little girl to Waitangi Day and he invited her, I thought, if this is false, it will rebound and bite him on the arse. But he meant it genuinely. He took her away. She enjoyed his company. He was really, I've met some brown people who are poor. Oh, it's so exciting. And after they went to Waitangi, and it didn't blow up in his face because he was genuine. And I think there was a palpable, observable truth to the guy so far.
But a big factor here is the desperate need of the New Zealand public and the media to believe that our politicians are warm people who connect and communicate with the electorate. We talked about how Clark worked the room and how she tried to relate to people. For heaven's sake, it's a job. This is their job. They've got to remember who people are, work rooms, go out, make contact, work the electorate, and yet we have this pathetic need to believe that somehow they're real, normal, ordinary people like us. This man was an investment broker. Clark was an academic in political studies. Most of our political leaders are lawyers or accountants. These are not people who necessarily connect with the public, but we almost have to write the narrative that says they are one of us.
And well, the interesting thing about the little girl who took to Waitangi was up until that morning he thought that the street in question, which had been in the news, was in South Auckland. And poor old Phil Goff, whose electorate it's in, had visited it repeatedly over the years, got nothing for it, but it just seemed to work for Key, didn't it?
Yeah, he's a risk taker to some extent, I think, perhaps more so than Clark. Although I do believe that he studied Clark. I think that John Key has sat down with Clark's tapes and her Hansard records, and I think that he has studied what made her a successful politician, and I think we're starting to see that. Well, I think that some of the ways that he reacts to things, I think that he has taken her idea of incremental change. And he knows, I think, also that you have to keep your friends close but your enemies closer. We've seen him do that. He's reached out to the Green Party, for goodness sake. I mean, it's just Labour now, and Jim Anderton and the rest of the House is sort of in some sort of polar bear hug.
Well, you'll know as well as I do that some of those grassroots national supporters are not at all happy. I've got, where are we? This is a disgraceful day in the history of a national government. John Key, you should feel ashamed. That's Michael Cullen getting his SOE job, which was not a major appointment. But, you know who these people are. Well, is that going to... I mean, maybe it works well for the general public, but is there a danger there of him alienating his grassroots supporters?
Perhaps eventually, but I think not for a long time. I think that the feedback I've been getting is that, you know, while he's getting polling ratings of 55%, he's as safe as houses, really. And you need to bank your political capital in the good times so that you can spend it in the bad times. And I think the more people he can get on side at the moment, I mean, he's saving up for a rainy day at the moment.
So the gallery's saving up and John Key's saving up.
We're all waiting.
Yeah.
We're all waiting for the deluge, are we?
Well, I mean, it's like being on the beach, isn't it? You've been told there's a tsunami coming. You're not sure how high it is or when it's going to arrive or how far back you should get. And it's kind of a bit like that with the recession at the moment. And I think also with the Key government, we don't know just how hard it's going to hit New Zealand and how sour public opinion is going to get. And because when it turns, it will turn.
Also,
So you're letting him have his honeymoon. But
Well, I don't think we're letting him have it. I think we're accepting
some
that he
of
is
you are
having
in
one.
bed with him.
Well, not on the press gallery, I wouldn't say.
It's like the Diana thing. There's a third person in this marriage, and it's the media.
I come back to what I said earlier. Helen Clark had exactly the same experience. I don't think that we're
This is true.
favouring him.
And remember this, that the last 3 times we changed from Labour to National or vice versa, the opposition, the defeated party was left in considerable disarray. It's again a testimony to Clark's political skill that Labour's looking still pretty solid and electable. Okay, so Phil Goff isn't the most dynamic politician, but they're a very solid opposition. They're not in disarray, and given the volatile economic times, so there's nothing certain at all for this Key government. They can't take the next election for granted by any means.
He often seems vague. You know, the Q&A interview, I really was struggling to see what he was saying out of that, but I kind of wonder whether it works.
Vagueness does work. Clark told me once that power has a blurring effect, and the higher you get, the more you tend to blur things because being dogmatic doesn't work at that level. So in that sense, he's learned his lessons
Reagan
well.
ran for president, you know, on vagueness, and he he didn't have any details. Didn't require details.
Is Key hard to draw as a cartoonist?
No, it took me. But it's very hard not to draw him smiling. It's because it's very hard to find a photograph of him when he isn't smiling. He's just so pleased to be there. But no, he's not hard to draw. I've mastered him.
Now we have to go soon. Just one thing I'm interested in what you all think. We've agreed that he has a certain style that's working for him. To what extent is that style his personal style, and to what extent is it communications advice?
Hard to say without being on the inside, but obviously a mix. There's a certain, as Tom says, easiness and amiability there. That seems to be his natural personality. He's clearly taken advice. He clearly has learnt from Clark. I agree, absolutely. That's another legacy she's left, that she not only pulled the National Party back to the centre and saved us from Don Brash, but she has influenced the way Key operates.
And he wouldn't have worked so hard to help her get that job if he didn't genuinely have huge regard and respect for her.
This is true, but he also wanted to get rid of Clark and Cullen because it made the Labour Party a great deal easier to handle.
That's far too cynical.
Possibly.
Well, we do have to go. That's been fascinating, and I think with Key in English, we'll look out for the Blair Brown narrative. And that is our show for this week. Thank you to our panellists, Dennis Welsh, Judy Callingham, Colin Easterner and Tom Scott, and thank you for watching. We'll be back with Media 7 at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye.